I rise today to lead my colleagues in a special order hour. On October 7th, Hamas launched a horrific attack against Israeli civilians, murdering over 1,400 people and taking hostage more than 244 women, children, families, and the elderly. Hamas spared no one. The hostage crisis has left hundreds of families desperate and searching for answers on the health and safety of their loved ones. This past month has been gut-wrenching. I've never felt this magnitude of pain, shock, and anger burning in the hearts of the Jewish people. The intentional genocidal violence inflicted on Israeli civilians and the unconscionable apathy of many nations is a sobering reminder of the fact that Israel remains surrounded by hostility and danger. For me and for so many of us, this goes beyond our belief in the survival of the Jewish state, and it rises far above politics as usual. It's a moment in history that begs for humanity, for unity, and for solidarity with Israel. I am wrecked by how quickly people in this country have forgotten the hostages still being held in Gaza by Hamas. I find myself having to reiterate over and over again that Israel was attacked by a terrorist organization whose mission is the eradication of Israel and the Jewish people. We must all remember not only the horrifying statistic of 240 captured, but who they are as people. These are real human beings. And that is why we are here tonight. And we will continue to come to this floor to call attention to all of the human beings who are brutally being held captive by Hamas in Gaza until every last one of them is released. Each of my colleagues who are joining me will speak about a hostage or family of hostages, show their beautiful faces, and remind all of us not to forget these victims who are suffering under terrorist brutality. Thankfully, Israel has welcomed home many children and some women this week, and I'm extremely grateful for President Biden's efforts to help make that possible. But we cannot and we will not stop until all hostages are reunited with their families. Tonight, I'll be sharing the story of the Bibas family. Parents Shiri and Yarden, 4-year-old Ariel, and 10-month-old Kafir from Kibbutz Nir Oz. Look at this beautiful family. Kafir, the youngest hostage, was just 9 months old on October 7th. He had just learned to crawl when he was abducted. His family is worried Kafir doesn't have access to formula. Look at Kafir's beautiful face. How could anyone justify kidnapping and taking hostage a 9-month-old? As a Jewish mother, I remember when my babies were just that age. I remember nursing them, holding them in my arms, being joyful about their first crawling, their first steps, looking forward to the beauty of their lives unfold. And looking at Kafir and Ariel's faces is heartbreaking, and it's deeply personal. Many of us have had the opportunity to meet with families of these hostages. Yesterday, Hamas claimed that Shiri, Ariel, and Kafir were killed in Gaza. I pray with all my heart that that is false. The barbarism and cruelty of Hamas knows no bounds. The Bibas family would never have been in harm's way in Gaza if Hamas did not launch its murderous attack on Israel and take children as leverage. Thank you. Take children as leverage on October 7th. On that fateful day, Shiri, Yarden, and their boys were hiding in a safe room when militants fired semi-automatic weapons outside the family's window as Yarden texted relatives, "I love you all." A half an hour later, he texted, "They're coming in," just before communication ceased. Since then, the world has seen a distressing video of Shiri holding her 2 young boys wrapped in a blanket close to her chest, while surrounded by Hamas militants, with another video depicting Yarden with a head injury, forcibly being taken away on a motorcycle. On Monday, the IDF announced the Bibas family was transferred by Hamas to another Palestinian terror group in Gaza, as if they were a commodity to give leverage to another terrorist organization. While we know the facts of October 7th and we've seen the family's pictures and videos, it's important to remember the light and the love of this family. Shiri is described by loved ones as a woman who touches everyone's heart, gentle and full of tenderness, which you could clearly see when she was trying to shield her children in the terror on her face. She was reborn with her 2 little sons. They were the light that filled her life. Under her loving wing, they were growing up happily. Ariel loves anything with wheels and a motor. He dreams of superheroes and dresses up as Batman. Yarden is a sensitive and loving father and husband. His brother, Ofri, says that while his brother looks big and strong, inside he's the most sensitive and gentle person he knows. Shiri's cousin, Yafar, said in an interview about her family, "I can only hope they are together. I hope they didn't separate her from her children. I try not to think about the worst. This is the only thing that keeps me going. But every day that goes by, we can't go down the same path anymore. Things need to be changed. Israel is going to be changed after this. We are all traumatized. This touched every family that is involved in Israel," unquote. My heart goes out to Ofri, Yifar, and their whole family. Make no mistake, Hamas will be held responsible. With that, Mr. Speaker, I now yield to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, for as much time as he may consume.
Mr. Speaker, this is a time of sadness, of wrenching pain, of anger, and of determination. It is my solemn duty, Mr. Speaker, to speak on this floor today about a courageous, talented, and generous young man, Itai Chen. His family is in the gallery. I had the opportunity to speak to them just a few minutes ago. As any family, knowing that their child is at great risk and not knowing his present welfare, they're grieving, but determined. Itai is an American-Israeli dual citizen bravely serving his nation in the IDF. That's probably incorrect. This is his nation. IDF is the land of his forebears and of his ancestors, and a land that offers sanctuary and safety to the Jewish people who have been savaged, hated, killed, maligned for millennia. On October 7th, Itai was taken hostage during Hamas's brutal, criminal, and savage attack on Israel and on innocent civilians in the land that is not contested by anybody. Itai is only 19 years old. And Mr. Speaker, I have not met Itai, though I hope to do so in person in the near future. But I've met with his father, Ruby, who is with us in the gallery today. As I said, his mother, Hagit, is joining us as well. Mr. Speaker, everything I've heard about their son has only reinforced my resolve to help bring Itai home and the other hostages home as well. Itai was raised in New York City, the city in which I was born, Mr. Speaker. He was always a precocious kid and a kind-hearted young man. Like his dad, he's an avid lover of basketball. Unlike his dad, however, he's a diehard Lakers fan. So there's a little conflict in the family, but that has not affected the deep love and concern that his family has for him. And I want to assure them, Mr. Speaker, that that is shared by the 435 members of this body. Not a partisan issue, but a human issue. Itai may not have inherited his father's basketball loyalties, Mr. Speaker, but he did inherit his New York grit. Itai also developed a calling for service at a very young age, participating in Boy Scouts and serving his community. That commitment to serving others drove Itai to join the IDF. I know his experience in captivity, as awful as it is. And very frankly, Mr. Speaker, the Red Cross that has seen the horror of how these hostages are being kept ought to tell the world that truth. But we know that his experience will not break his generous spirit and his dedication to the sacred Jewish principle of tikkun olam, repairing the world, to doing good so that others may do better. He, his parents, Ruby, who I've referenced, Hagit, his mother, his brothers Roy and Alon, and the rest of his family and friends continue to show tremendous resilience and courage. And we can do no less in the Congress. We can do no less in the White House. We can do no less in America than make sure we bring this American home alive and healthy. I think, Mr. Speaker, how I would feel if one of my 3 daughters, or one of my 3 grandchildren, or one of my 4 great-grandchildren were in some tunnel or crevice illegally, criminally. I would do everything I could to get them back. And we must do everything to get not only Itai, but all those pictures that we will see of innocent people killed, maimed, and taken hostage by a criminal group we call Hamas. I want Itai and his loved ones to know that we're going to make sure this Congress does everything it can to bring him and the other hostages home as quickly as possible. Mr. Speaker, as a symbol of that promise, I'm wearing a dog tag that Ruby gave me just weeks ago. Until they return safely to our shores, we'll continue to stand strong with their families. Their grief is our grief. Their hope is our hope. And that hope grows as hostages are released. But it will not end until they are all home, safe, in the arms of their families and loved ones. I thank the gentlelady for taking this special order and for yielding me this time. And I yield back to the gentlelady from Florida.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman for his poignant remarks. And now I'd like to yield such time as he may consume to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Gottheimer.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you for doing this. I rise tonight, Mr. Speaker, because on October 7th, Hamas terrorists attacked Israel and abducted more than 230 people, including many Americans. Hamas brutally murdered, raped, burned alive, and decapitated more than 1,000 innocent babies, children, women, men, and elderly. The deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. 40 American citizens were slaughtered by Hamas, and 9 have been living in horrifying fear at the hands of terrorists for more than 50 days. It blows my mind that this isn't talked about every single day in this country, that Americans were killed and Americans remain hostages. Hamas killed Americans, and terrorists still hold American hostages inside Gaza. That should be the beginning and end of the argument as to why we must crush and kill Hamas. Thankfully, because of President Biden's resolve and strong leadership, groups of hostages have been rescued, including 4-year-old Abigail, an American citizen. But as of today, there's still 160 hostages. One of 8 American hostages is Idan Alexander, a 19-year-old from Tenafly, New Jersey, northern New Jersey, in my district. You can see Idan shared with me by his family, his mom. I've spent time with his family. They're phenomenal people, just such wonderful, warm people. With his sister, who's at Tenafly High School. And after graduating from Tenafly High School in 2022, Idan began serving in the Israel Defense Forces. Idan is the type of person who would regularly call his mother to check in, and his sister considers him to be her best friend. He's devoted to his friends and is always there for his family. He swam in high school. I've seen pictures of him at the prom. He's just like any other American kid we know. Since day one, I've been in constant contact with the Alexander family and the State Department. Their unimaginable strength in the face of unfathomable pain gives us all great hope. It's time to get all of these hostages home. There are some people who equivocate about Hamas. There should be no equivocation. They are designated by the United States of America as a foreign terrorist organization. And anybody who spent time looking at images that many of us saw in the videos of the barbaric, heinous, and unthinkable acts that took place on October 7th knows what Hamas is capable of. Look what they're doing to innocent Palestinian civilians every single day. Are they welcoming them underground, giving them safe haven? No. They take no responsibility. They use them as innocent people, as human shields. That's what Hamas does. Hamas charter advocates jihad against the Jewish people and the elimination of the Jewish state. Israel is surrounded by terror groups that want to kill their people, including Arab Israelis. Israel is and remains the only vibrant, progressive, and inclusive democracy in the region. They are our key ally because they are critical to our national security and they stand up for values that we share, strong democratic values. They're key to our fight against terror in the region, against Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and against Hamas. In Israel, Arab parties serve in the Knesset. Women serve at the highest levels of the military, and the country remains an oasis for LGBTQ people in a region hostile toward the community. It sickens me that some people try to romanticize Hamas. They should be reminded that in Gaza, under Hamas rule, same-sex relations are outlawed. Make no mistake, your life would be at risk every day if you're openly gay in Gaza or the West Bank. Additionally, Hamas's 1988 charter states that Muslim women are important because they, quote, manufacture men, unquote. Hamas even enforces what women wear in public. There's also no law in Gaza that criminalizes violence against women within the family, including sexual violence. Hamas allows honor killings, the murder of women and the girls accused of what they call, quote, immoral sexual conduct. Yet it took UN Women a month and a half to recognize that women and girls were raped in Israel. And even then, they still refused to mention Hamas. Do they not believe the fact that Hamas terrorists committed horrifying and unspeakable acts against innocent girls and women, including many that we've seen images of? And as you see all of these hostages being released, you can't imagine what they've been through. And I think, of course, of the images we're seeing this evening. those who are still hostage. Thankfully, President Biden has been phenomenal, as I said, with his unwavering support for the state of Israel and the Jewish people. The president understands that you have to actually hold terrorists who commit atrocities accountable, or they will strike again and be stronger. Hamas terrorists have made it clear, their leadership has said that they will not back down and are committed to, quote, a second, third, and fourth October 7th against Israel. So let me conclude by saying we must stand by our key ally to get all hostages home, crush the terrorists, and provide humanitarian aid to innocent Palestinian civilians being used by Hamas as human shields. Israel must eliminate every single terrorist responsible for the atrocities committed on October 7th, and we must get these hostages home. I want to thank Debbie for her leadership. I want to thank everybody, all of my colleagues, for being here this evening, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman from New Jersey. And now I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Trone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to call for the release of Abraham Munder, who was taken hostage by Hamas during the brutal attack on October 7th. Mr. Munder was a 78-year-old father and grandfather. Who does that? And has been in captivity for 54 days and counting. Abraham and his wife Ruti lived and raised their family in Kibbutz Nir Uz for nearly 60 years. They built a home, they built a life. It's all gone. Nir Uz, one of the hardest hit by Hamas on October 7th, almost a quarter of their population was murdered or kidnapped. The Munder family has endured unspeakable hardship and tragedy in these weeks. That day, Abraham and Rudi's daughter, Karen, was visiting with her parents with her son, Ohad. They all were taken hostage by Hamas. Ohad spent his 9th birthday as a hostage in Gaza. A few weeks ago, I had the solemn honor of meeting with the hostages' family members in my Capitol office, including Karen's cousin, Meruv, and her son, Itay. All they wanted was for the hostages to be brought home, for the world not to forget about their loved ones. Many of us here in Congress took these meetings, and we all pledged we'd do all we could to bring them home. For the last 54 days, Abraham has been held separately and was feared dead by his family. For the last 54 days, he hasn't known that his son was murdered in the attacks. For the last 54 days, he hasn't known that his wife and his daughter and grandson survived and were taken hostage. As a grandfather and a parent myself, I can't begin to imagine the nightmare. By the grace of God, Rudy, Karen, and Ohad were returned to Israel on November 24th as part of a negotiated ceasefire and hostage exchange. Today we call for Abraham to be brought home. Let him grieve and heal with his family. We continue to call for Hamas to release all the hostages. We must bring them all home. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for his participation, and now I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, Mr. Speaker. On October 7th, the state of Israel was treacherously attacked by the terrorist group Hamas. They murdered 1,200 peaceful people, many of them at a music festival, some from kibbutzim near the border. They kidnapped 250 people, illegally of course, and took them into Gaza. We know that some of them have been released in a deal that was made. One of them was an American-Israeli named Abigail, and she turned out 4 years old. She was kept with 3 other hostages together and was given 1 piece of pita, Middle East bread, for the 4 of them per day. And when they came home, they had to be deloused. Their hair and their clothes were full of lice. And they said that if they had to go to the bathroom, they had to wait 2 hours. Mr. Speaker, Hamas has said over and over again, they have said, we will attack over and over again and again, until Israel is no more. And when people demand a ceasefire, we should think, what would we have thought about people demanding a ceasefire 7 or 8 weeks after Pearl Harbor. And a ceasefire would simply permit Hamas to regroup and to attack Israel again and again and again, which they have told us they would do. And by the way, there have been ceasefires. There have been 4 ceasefires, every one of which Hamas broke, including breaking a ceasefire on October 7th. One of the hostages who was taken was a fellow named Danny Elgarat, brother of Yitzhak Elgarat. And I want to read what Danny said about that. He said, "My name is Danny Elgarat. Around 10:30 a.m., my brother calls me, my brother Yitzhak Elgarat. He lives in kibbutz Nir Oz. He tells me that his hand is crushed, flushed with blood. He was hysterical and stressed, and I didn't quite understand what was going on with him, and I tried to guide him how to apply a tourniquet to stop the blood. Suddenly, while I am still trying to guide him, I hear screams in the background and shouts. Then Itzik, my brother Itzik, shouts, 'Danny, it's the end,' and our call is cut off. Afterwards, we checked the amount of Itzik's phone, the location of the phone. We found out that his phone is located in Gaza, the center of the city of Gaza. When he would come back to us, we would sit in the porch with a good glass of whiskey, and we would say it was just a bad dream," unquote. Mr. Speaker, I pray for Yitzchak and all the remaining hostages who were so barbarically taken from their families. Bring them home and defeat Hamas so it can't do this again and again and again. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman from New York, and now I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Frankel.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, on October 7th, the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust, Hamas terrorists took over 200 hostages from Israel, men, women, children, elderly, the young, including dozens of IDF soldiers who Hamas refused to release. And I want to tell you about one of them. A beautiful young lady, Nama Levy. She's the second of 4 children. She's an athlete, loves soccer, triathlon. And during her summer in high school, she was a participant in the Hands of Peace project in the United States, working towards peace between Israelis and Palestinians. And after she graduated high school, like other Israeli youth, she completed her coursework to be an observation soldier, and she began her military service on October 5 at the Nahal Oz base. And it was 2 days later, just 2 days later, that on October 7th at 6:32 a.m., she woke to red alerts and went into a safe room with her friends, and she texted her mom, and there's a text. "Mom, we're in the safe room. I've never seen anything like this." And her mother says, "What's happening, my darling?" And what her mother then saw on a video loop over and over was her daughter being dragged off by her hair by Hamas into the back of a video. And her mom lives the same nightmare as the other families of the hostages. She thinks about every day, where is her daughter now? What kind of life is she living? Where does she sleep? Does she have water? Does she have air? Is she being treated well? Look at this young lady, just starting her life with hopes and dreams. Let's bring her back. And I yield back.
I thank my friend from Florida. Now I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Debbie, and to all my colleagues for being here today. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak on behalf of Avi Azili. I was supposed to be here speaking about him being held hostage by Hamas and the need to bring him home safely and without delay. Instead, I'm sadly here to speak about his memory. Of Avi, a dedicated family man who just hours ago it was confirmed that he was killed by Hamas. According to his father in New Jersey, and Avi bravely fought back against the terrorists, but they had not heard anything since that day in October. The news of his death comes hours after his wife, Leah, an American, who was released from captivity after 54 days. While we are grateful for her release, we mourn the loss of Avi as he leaves behind Liat and her 3 children. We're keeping friends, family, and certainly his community in our prayers. But unfortunately, Ozzy's story is just one of thousands, many that you'll hear tonight. Citizens, American citizens, many who've been killed, taken hostage by Hamas. When I traveled with Debbie and a bipartisan group just 2 days after the attack, when we were in Israel, we heard the stories from the families. We listened to 2 children talk about how their mother and father hid in that shelter until they broke through and took her father away while she hid. And we're still waiting to hear what happened there. It's impossible to try to fathom exactly the pain that they are going through, to watch and to hear what happened as they're hiding. Many Israelis continue to live that dark day, and they're waiting to hear about those who have been taken away. It's time to bring them all home. The images, the videos of the reuniting children and families brings that joy to our heart in such time of pain. And it is a reminder that we must bring all the remaining hostages home without delay. And I'm proud to join with my colleagues here today to highlight our commitment to bring every single one of them home. We cannot and we will not be silent until all those held by that terrorist organization are reunited with their families. As a father, grandfather, it breaks my heart to listen to the pain of those families and what they're going through. And I cannot fathom what the Azili family across Israel have lived through since this brutal attack. Avi and Liat's story is a reminder that every single hostage in the Israeli loss is a son, a daughter, a mother, a father, a brother, or sister. May Avi's memory be a blessing to his family and to all of us. And to Debbie, thank you for what you're doing, and I yield back.
Thank you so much to the gentleman from New Jersey, and I can say it was so incredibly moving and meaningful to be able to join you and Mr. Panetta from California and Senator Ernst just days after those horrific attacks. And now I'd like to recognize my colleague and friend from New York, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman.
Thank you very much to the gentle lady from Florida.
For 3 minutes.
Thank you to the gentle lady from Florida and for organizing this very important special order hour. And thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving us the time to do this. I rise tonight to shine a light on the Metzger family from Kibbutz Nir Oz, which suffered the unimaginable loss of 38 members of the kibbutz, and from where a shocking 75 innocent people were taken captive by Hamas. That is almost 1/3 of the innocent hostages who were abducted by Hamas on October 7th. 2 of those abducted were Tamar Metzger, age 78, and her husband Yoram, age 80, grandparents. Mrs. Metzger was released 2 days ago after 52 days in captivity. My family had an opportunity to spend some time with the Metzger's son, Nir, and his 2 children, Ron and Omer, this week in New York. According to Nir, the Hamas terrorists, teenagers, she said, dragged his mom out of her bathroom, bashed her face in with a rifle, and severely injured her knees and legs as they violently took a 78-year-old woman to the tunnels of Gaza. And in Gaza, both Metzgers were kept in a tiny, dark, and moist room in an underground tunnel where there were 12 mattresses on the floor for the two of them and 10 other hostages from Kibbutz Nir Oz. There was essentially nowhere for them to walk or move. They were not allowed to speak. And if they did speak, the terrorists would beat them. And this happened to a number of them, including 78-year-old Mrs. Metzger, at least one time. Yoran remains held captive in that dank darkness underground, unable to move, unable to speak, under constant fear of being beaten by the Hamas terrorists. We cannot allow another day to go by before these innocent civilians are released back to their homes in Israel. We cannot stop pushing and pressing Hamas to release them and putting pressure on allies and other countries in the Middle East, in Qatar, in Egypt, to put pressure on Hamas to release the illegally abducted civilians who are kept captive in the tunnels of Gaza without any light, without food, and without any ability to move around. It is time to bring them home. It is time to bring them all home. I yield back.
The gentleman from New York, and now recognized for 3 minutes, the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Stevens, who is the co-chair of the Congressional Task Force on American Hostages Wrongfully Detained Abroad.
Thank you to my colleague from Florida, and thank you for her incredible leadership in the House of Representatives during this incredibly sobering and trying moment. When the Task Force for American Hostages and Americans Wrongfully Detained Abroad was created, we never envisioned a moment like the one that we found ourselves in on October 7th. And we as Americans, we as members of the House of Representatives, don't just call for the release of the American hostages in Gaza, but we call for the release of all of the hostages. For what took place on October 7th was an attack on innocent people. It was an attack on all of humanity, an attack on those living freely and peacefully, going about their daily business in free society. They were attacked by terrorists, they were attacked by those who seek to do evil, and they were attacked because of what Israel means to the world. That cannot stand. Behind me is a picture of a woman, Kariana Arev, age 19, a surveillance soldier who was taken captive on October 7th when Hamas terrorists attacked the base at Nahal Oz, where she was stationed. Her family is still eagerly waiting for her release, including her parents and her 24-year-old sister, Sasha. Sasha's plea for the return of her sister has been heard around the world. And as I join my colleagues this evening in bringing attention to the individuals like Karina and the remaining hostages, it is incredibly sobering. Sasha's words, of which I would like to read about her beloved sister, are as follows. She called us in the morning of October 7th, and she said that the base had been raided and attacked. She basically called all of us to say goodbye. And so if she won't live, she asked us to continue our life. The last message was, the terrorists, they are here. A few hours later, we identified her in a video. This was a video that the terrorists took and then published on their Telegram channels. This is our last confirmation that she is alive. She is alive on the video, but we do not know what is going on now. We know they probably took her. She was in a Jeep with other girls. We went to the police to show them the video and to say that we identify my sister so they can do something. The same evening, military officers came to our door and they said to us that my sister Karina is held in the hands of a terror organization. From this moment, we do not know any other information. We sit, we watch TV, and we hope for the best. She continues, she's all I have, you know. I love my parents and all, but she is the one my heart belongs to. She's the only one I love in this world and the only one I want to be with me. She always comforts me. Even though she's my little sister, I can always come to her, and she'll always be logical and make me come together. She is so lovely. She is so innocent. She is so childish, although she is just a teenager. She likes to decorate her room. She likes stickers and the fluffy dolls of the animals. She loves to paint. She loves cosmetics, and she's always doing my makeup. I do not understand anything about it. I remember the day she was born because the gap between us is 5 years. I was in the hospital and I saw her. All this life, since the moment she was born until now, is just rolling in my head like a film. Hamas, release the hostages now. Bring Karina home to her family. I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman, for her poignant remarks and her dedication to this cause. I'd now like to yield 2.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my good friend from Florida, for bringing us together to bring awareness and to never forget the folks that still need to be returned home. Mr. Speaker, I rise to demand the immediate release and safe return of the remaining hostages in Gaza held by terrorist Hamas. I am grateful for President Biden's leadership that has led to the release of hostages. However, many remain captive, including 22-year-old Omer Nutra. Omer was born in the United States and is the son of Rowan and Orna, and now has spent over 50 days in captivity. He grew up in Long Island, where he was the regional president of the United Synagogue Youth and captain of many sports teams. His friends and family describe Omer as a natural-born leader who is compassionate and for seeing the best in people and for bringing communities together, a peaceful soul. His kindness and sense of duty led him to defer his future at the university to defend his grandparents' land with the hope of bringing communities together. Putting his future on hold to serve others, that's Omer. His drive to lead and to serve now puts him last in line to be released from captivity. Last in line. His family, who are with us here this evening, have been in agony for the past 7 weeks with no word. Is Omer alive? We will continue to pray for him. As a mother of an Air Force veteran, I can only imagine their agony. This is something that no parent, no mother, no father, no grandparent could ever imagine that could happen to their loved one. I join my colleagues in calling for the immediate release of hostages held by terrorist Hamas. And I urge the administration to continue to do everything in their power to help free hostages like Omer and ensure their safe return home. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
You're welcome. I thank the gentlewoman from California. And now I'd like to recognize for 2 minutes the co-chair of the Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Manning.
I want to thank my dear friend, Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz, for putting this evening together and for meeting with me and so many other of our members with hostage families for week after week. On October 7th, we woke in horror to Hamas's brutal and despicable terrorist attacks, invading Israel, firing rockets at innocent civilians, going house to house, murdering babies, executing parents in front of their children, and massacring 250 young people at a music festival. And as if killing 1,200 people was not enough, Hamas took an estimated 240 innocent civilians hostage in Gaza, including elderly women, babies, young children, Holocaust survivors. Like many of my colleagues, I've spent the past 7 weeks meeting with the families of hostages. Hostages including Keith Siegel from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and his wife, Aviva, who were kidnapped from Kibbutz Kfar Aza. I met with Keith's sister, Lucy, and his niece, Emily, who spoke so lovingly of their family members. Keith and Aviva are the parents of 4 children and the proud grandparents of 5 grandchildren. Keith grew up in my home state of North Carolina. He moved to Israel as a young man, where he met Aviva, who was born in South Africa and had moved to Israel at the age of 8. Keith and Aviva have lived happily in Kibbutz Kfar Aza for 40 years. On the morning of October 7th, Keith and Aviva were having a quiet day at home when they were brutally attacked and abducted by Hamas terrorists who drove them into Gaza in their own car. After 51 days of grueling captivity, Aviva was finally released earlier this week as part of the temporary ceasefire. Keith is still being held hostage, and I can't even imagine what Aviva has gone through or the agony the entire family is going through, waiting for their beloved Keith to be freed from captivity. I've met with other hostage families and learned about their loved ones, and I realized that just like the stories of Holocaust survivors, each story about a hostage is unique. Each story is heartbreaking because each of these hostages has loving family members whose lives have been torn apart, who are living the agony of not knowing what has become of their loved ones. Are they okay? Are they healthy? Are they injured? Are they alive? Will they ever see them again? I have heard stories that have brought me to tears, that haunt my dreams, and that should make all of us redouble our efforts to bring those hostages home. I've met with several of these families so often, I feel like they're my own extended family members. Over the past few days, we've seen some of the hostages released and brought home to their families. And I thank President Biden and this administration, along with Israelis and our regional partners who have worked to ensure that the agreed-upon hostage exchanges took place, but there is still much more work to do. There are still more than 130 people being held hostage, and we've only begun to learn about the terrible circumstances of their captivity. And this has told us We have absolutely no time to waste. Earlier this week, I was proud to help lead the debate on the House floor on a bipartisan resolution that we passed unanimously demanding the release of the hostages. But passing a resolution is not enough. We must do more. Hamas has still not allowed the International Red Cross to visit the hostages. This is unacceptable. Our country and countries around the world must join together and demand the immediate release of all the remaining hostages: the children, the women, the men, the civilians, and the soldiers. We have no time to waste. I look forward to rejoicing with the Siegel family when Keith is finally released, and I look forward to bringing all the hostages home. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady from North Carolina and recognize for a minute and a half Mr. Auchincloss from Massachusetts.
Thank you to my colleague from Florida for her leadership on this issue. I rise today to tell the story of Ofer Calderon. On October 7th, the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust, Ofer, along with his children Sahar, 16, and Erez, 12, was taken hostage by Hamas from the Nir Oz kibbutz close to the Gaza Strip. During that brutal attack, 29 of kibbutz Nir Oz's 400 residents were murdered and 80 were taken captive. These are not just numbers. Those residents who were murdered were individuals with hopes now extinguished, with lives now cut short. And those taken hostage are living in unimaginable terror, and their families are waiting, hoping for good news and fearing the worst. Ofer is a father of four, a carpenter. He loves to build and to rebuild engines, to travel, to take family camping trips, to race and ride dirt bikes, to help cook Shabbat dinner for his family. When asked about Ofer, his family describes his easygoing energy and a huge smile. We cannot lose sight of the fact that there is a family and a story like this one behind each one of these names, of those murdered and of those taken hostage. Ofer is one of them. Ofer's children have thankfully been returned, but their family will not be made whole again until Ofer is released as well. His relatives are my constituents, and my office is providing any support that we can. But the ultimate responsibility is on Hamas to release Ofer and all hostages immediately and unconditionally. I urge those terrorists to salvage a shred of humanity by releasing him and by releasing all others held hostage. But I understand also that the hopes of finding a shred of humanity within Hamas are close to nil, which is why that I remind my colleagues here today that we cannot handcuff Israel with calls for a unilateral ceasefire as they work to achieve their primary shared goal we all have, bringing all of the hostages home.
Thank the gentleman from Massachusetts, and now I'd like to yield a minute and a half to Mr. Ryan from New York.
Thank my colleague from Florida. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of my Hudson Valley community to honor the memories of the community members we lost on October 7th and to plead and to demand the safe return of all the Hudson Valley families and friends still held hostage by Hamas. Judy and Gadi Haggai, who you can see behind me, are both dual American Israeli citizens. Judy born in the Hudson Valley in Goshen, New York, and Orange County. On October 7th, Judy and Gadi were on their usual morning walk around kibbutz Nir Oz when they were ambushed by Hamas, shot, and the last location of their phone traced to Gaza. Judy and Haggai are not combatants or soldiers. They're a school teacher and a musician. They are peace-loving people whose only crime was being Jewish. Their niece, Ofri, took a one-way flight to the United States, came to my office and made two powerful requests. Never allow our country to forget her aunt and her uncle and to fight with everything that we have to bring them back. I promised her I would do that, and I stand here today to honor that commitment. Mr. Speaker, I served 27 months in combat. Our rule was that we never leave a fallen sister or brother behind. I ask all to not forget Judy and Gadi. And I refuse, and I know my fellow Americans refuse, to leave behind our Hudson Valley brothers and sisters. Tragically, the Hagais are not the only Hudson Valley family grieving. Maurice Schneider of Kingston, New York, my hometown, lost his sister, Margit, and his brother-in-law, Yossi, in these barbaric attacks. And while we honor their loss, it's impossible to mourn properly while the fate of their daughter, Shiri, and their grandsons, Ariel and Kafir, who you heard about from my colleague earlier, hang in the balance. Ariel 4, Kafir 10 months old, my children, my two boys, Theo and Cameron 4 and 1. And I cannot think every night as I put my boys to bed of anything other than the faces of the Bibas family. These are not prisoners of war. They are children, babies, ripped away from their home and taken hostage by Hamas terrorists. This is pure, unadulterated evil. To the Hagai family, the Bibas family, to their friends, to my whole community, to every Jewish person worried about their safety amidst the historic rise in anti-Semitism, know this: we're here for you, we see you, and we will not give up until every single hostage comes home safely. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and now I'd like to recognize for 2 minutes the gentleman from California, Mr. Pernetta, who I also had the privilege of traveling to Israel in the days after the attacks.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Wasserman Schultz and I were in the Middle East on October 7th of this year. We were part of a congressional delegation trip led by Senator Joni Ernst, and we went there to talk about peace, but unfortunately, due to the bloodthirsty attack by Hamas, we left the region talking about war. But despite the change in the tone of our trip, we became the first congressional delegation to visit Israel in the immediate aftermath of the October 7th attack. While we were in country, though, we met with family members of victims of that attack, including David and Noam Perry, a brother and sister whose 79-year-old father, Chaim Perry, was kidnapped by Hamas from his home in the kibbutz Naraz, a peaceful agricultural town whose name means meadow of strength in Hebrew. A town whose 400 citizens probably could be seen prior to the attack taking to the streets to peacefully protest the prime minister's right-wing government. Yet on the morning of October 7th, that town was anything but peaceful, as the Hamas attack left it smashed up and smoldering, with one of four of its residents either murdered or kidnapped. That day, Hamas lived up to its definition as a genocidal terrorist organization, as it attacked Israel to kill Jews, to kill the Jewish society, and to kill peace. As part of that goal, Hamas attacked Naros and murdered 27 of its inhabitants and took 73 hostages to Gaza. At the time of the attack, Chaim was not only the leader in that community, he was also a longtime peace activist for the Israeli-Palestinian issues. He's the type that would drive sick Palestinians from Gaza into Israel and be cared for at Israeli hospitals. But now the father of 5 and grandfather of 13, Chaim is most likely isolated in the dungeons of the Gazan tunnels. Although Noam Perry describes her father as strong and brave, she also admits that he is not young. A metal worker by trade, Chaim has had 2 heart surgeries and now has been without his heart medication for 7 weeks. I'll never forget when we met him, all that Noam was concerned about was that he didn't have his medication to survive. Mr. Speaker, it's going to be tough going forward. We hope that the hostages are released and that there are more pauses in conflict. We hope to pass and provide meaningful support and humanitarian assistance so that Israel can continue to defend itself from the existential and constant threat of Hamas. Mr. Speaker, although things may never be the same for Naraz, for Chaim, and for the family, we do know that because of its determination to survive and succeed, the same determination it has shown for over 75 years in its existence, Israel will continue to be that meadow of strength in the Middle East for peace, for prosperity, and for democracy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his poignant words, and Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure how much time is remaining.
The gentlelady.
His time has expired. If there is time following remarks, then
Mr. Speaker.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bergman, for 30 minutes.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield a few minutes to my colleague, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, to complete her testimony.
The gentleman yields. The gentlelady from
I thank the General deeply for his consideration, and I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, for his remarks.
Thank you. I want to thank my colleague, Deborah Wasserman Schultz, for organizing this hour. I want to thank the Speaker for his indulgence and attention as we've gone through a long list of difficult conversations talking about the hostages. I want to thank my friend from Michigan, General Bergman, for the time. We should not have to be here tonight. We should not be forced to talk about some of the 250 people brutally kidnapped and taken hostage on October 7th. It should not be necessary to call for immediate, unconditional release of these hostages. We should not have to. We should not be here because Hamas should not be holding hostages. I'm grateful that more than 100 hostages have been released and returned to Israel. But 143 hostages remain in captivity, held by Hamas, by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and by others in Gaza. The families don't know the status of their loved ones. They don't know where their loved ones are. They don't know when they will be coming home. So I will talk tonight about one hostage, Hirsch Goldberg, Poland. Hirsch's parents, Rachel and John, are from Chicago. I've been friends with his Aunt Abby for more than 30 years. I know his grandmother, Leah. Hirsch's family is now my family. Hirsch was born in Northern California. His family moved to Virginia when Hirsch was 4 and to Israel when he was 7. That was in 2008. Hirsch grew up in Jerusalem, reached adulthood, was known widely as a kind, gentle mensch. On Friday, October 6th of this year, Hirsch was with his family in Jerusalem. It was the evening of the Sabbath, Shabbat, and the holiday of Simchat Torah. The family went to synagogue and then went to dinner at a friend's house with 2 other families. After dinner, Hirsch grabbed his backpack and left to meet his friend Amr. They later learned that Hirsch and his friend were going to a concert in the South, a music festival. That was on Saturday, October 7th. I'd like to now read at length some of the words of Hirsch's father, Jonathan Poland, published in Time magazine. He says, describing his circumstance on Sunday, having learned that Hirsch was taken hostage on Saturday. At some time, he says, I think it was Sunday morning, a picture started to circulate online that was from an outdoor festival. It was a picture from an outdoor bomb shelter. They're not uncommon in the south of Israel. Our son was in the picture, as was Honor. Through social media, we started to search for other families of people who were in the shelter and to try to piece together a story. What we have subsequently pieced together based on conversations with the 3 witnesses who were in the shelter with him is the following. Sometime around 7:30 a.m. Saturday morning, those in the bomb shelter came under heavy gunfire. Grenades were being tossed into the shelter. Hirsch's friend Honor, who was by the entrance of the bomb shelter, is responsible for the lives of anybody who's still alive. He was picking up grenades and tossing them back out and taking control of the situation. But it was total chaos. At least 11 grenades were thrown into the shelter. Honor picked up 8 and threw them back out. 3 exploded inside. People were critically wounded. Next, we know from witnesses is at 9 a.m., gunmen came into the shelter and shouted, "Anybody who can get on their feet must walk out." And our son was one of the small number to walk out. That was 55 days ago. 7 Shabbat dinners with an empty seat in the Goldberg-Hirsch family. 7 weeks of uncertainty, not knowing where Hirsch is. 7 weeks of not knowing how Hirsch is doing. 7 weeks not knowing when Hirsch is coming home. Tonight we've heard about so many of these hostages. 143 of the 250 plus hostages taken still are in captivity. The IRC must be able to see Hirsch and every one of the other hostages. Hirsch and all the other hostages must come home. Not someday, not soon, but now. We owe it to these hostages to bring them home. We owe it to our families. And we must make sure that Hamas can never take hostages, can never attack Israel ever again. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I deeply thank my friend from Michigan, General Bergman, for his indulgence and his generosity. And I close by reminding the American public the names and faces you saw tonight are only a fraction of those who remain held hostage in Gaza by cowardly terrorists, by Hamas. I hope every American understands that Israel is fighting to protect her citizens from this diabolical terrorist organization and to rescue her hostages. There is only one culprit to blame for this war, and that is Hamas. Their singular goal is to destroy Israel and kill Jews. Mr. Speaker, this chamber has always and will always continue to stand strong with Israel and work to release these victims from terrorist tyranny and support preventing an attack like this from being perpetrated against Israel by Hamas ever again. Am Israel Chai, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back to the gentleman.
Thank you. And Mr. Speaker, I now yield to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Landsman, 1 minute, as he provides his statement.
Thank you so much for yielding, and to my colleague, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, for bringing us all together today. I just want to say a word or two about Doris Leiber, who I met a few weeks ago. She came to the Capitol with other families who have loved ones who were taken hostage. Her son, Guy, was taken hostage by Hamas on October 7th, 26 years old. He was at a festival with his friends, and terror took over. He was shot in the arm and called his mother. That was the last time she heard his voice. We hope that and pray that he is alive and that he will be released. Every single one of these hostages must be released. Hamas must release every single hostage, and they must surrender. They can end this nightmare, and they can end this war. Thank you, and I yield back.